Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Decloak podcast. And my very special guest today is Marius Poskus. Marius, how are you? Everything okay?
I'm good. How are you, Leo? Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I'd seen your posts on LinkedIn, and for anyone who doesn't know Marius will give a big introduction to himself in a second. But the thing that kind of really drew my attention was your is it satire posts? I'd say, but I think very, very authentic point of view when it comes to cyber, and also excellent taste in socks. So there we go. And that kind of drew me towards Marius on LinkedIn. And obviously we've connected and we've kind of, getting to know each other and stuff like that. But yes, Marius, if you'd like to give an introduction to yourself and a kind of overview of your career as well. Cheers.
Yeah, so obviously, thanks for having me, Leo. It's always great, to meet new people. Just a bit of an intro, I guess. So I'm currently a CISO for a fintech business. Been here for just over 2.5 years. Just a bit of an overview, I guess, some of the other activities. So I run my own podcast as well. I write a weekly newsletter about cybersecurity. I sit on currently 3 cybersecurity vendors advisory boards, so I like to get involved into, all aspects, I guess, of cybersecurity. So not only, I guess protecting our organization, but making sure what our friends and partners and vendors are building aligns to CISO needs, helping them to sort of guide their go-to-market strategy. I am part of loads of various CISO networks, I think, which helps not only to learn and share ideas with your peers, but also present and obviously share my ideas. I've been kind of diving deep into AI sort of field, helping various stealth vendors building their AI capabilities. Dabble in various sort of AI applications, automation, and things I like. So, keeping myself busy.
Nice. I love it. And obviously I'd feel like a scumbag if we didn't promote your podcast as well, something that I've been following for a while. And talk me through your podcast, and, there's no shame in plugging it here. Yeah.
Yeah. So my podcast is called Cyber Diaries. We are up to, I think, we've just finished episode 25. So I'll go episode 26 next week with Paul Watts, who is a great friend of mine. Again, big CISO, used to be a CISO for Domino's Pizza back in the day before I joined Domino's. But yeah, I kind of wanted to, and I guess I kind of picked a format, I guess, kind of 2 ways. First of all, I don't like editing, so my podcast is always streaming live. But I think secondly, I was really sort of pushing towards, I've seen many podcasts, and sometimes, they look scripted or premeditated, and I was really leaning towards the sort of thing that we run the podcast live. We have a guest where, we have a theme, but I guess it's just genuine conversation about 2 people about cybersecurity. And a goal is hopefully, to get to a point where we have a decent live audience, so people, can participate, and we can include them into, asking questions, whether it's, cybersecurity leaders, whether it's vendors, whether any other interesting people that joins the podcast.
And I guess, more and more podcasts are coming up, and, I've had some situations where we've been recording where, there's been an Amazon driver at the door, someone's cat's jumped on their head. I mean, listen, I think if I had the permission, we'd probably run some outtakes on the channel as well, and, for the lols. But I guess it's like, I think we'd spoken before, and obviously, if you're looking for someone, give me a shout and we'll jump on and we'll go full organic on it rather than any scripted nonsense. But yeah, I mean, obviously you've got quite a good career, Marius. You're a multi-award winner as well. You're someone that lends a lot of credence within the industry. And talk me through some of the challenges that you've experienced, and anything that you'd like to share that I guess anybody can learn from. I mean, you've probably faced quite a lot of challenges within the industry, but yeah, if there's anything that comes to mind, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a few things, and I think I kind of changed my I guess as you mature, you change your view and how you look at cybersecurity. So a couple of things that stick out straight away. I think I'm very big proponent, and I've been talking sort of last maybe couple of years about the fact that if you look at cybersecurity, and look at statistics, the amount of breaches are increasing year on year on. The amount of we spend in cybersecurity is following the same trend line. What tells you is that we're not basically moving the needle in the right direction. And I think big problem for that is that we are spending more money to solve more incidents, more vulnerabilities, more anomalies and things like that. So basically, we're just spending more money to do more firefighting. And I think, the important way to look at cyber, and I've been kind of saying to people, and actually I kind of transform some of the initiatives in various businesses is that, you might have a project to look at the, hack away at the backlog. But if you are not building processes that reduces introduction into the backlog, you are just, as I say, you're just firefighting and drowning. So actually building processes that looks at the root cause of why bad things are happening and how we can build processes, business processes that prevents them from happening in the first place, you're going to be so much better for it. So, if you have, 10,000 vulnerabilities, sometimes you just need to say, we'll just leave it. Let's build a process how we stop introducing vulnerabilities in the first place. And I think unless you're gonna stem the creation of the bad things and actually understand why this incident happened in the first place, not just about oh, let's solve the incident, move on. Yeah, but why this incident happened in the first place? Why we get this alert? What's behind it? What's the is there a broken business process? I always say you have this vulnerability in your code. No, but why did the developer created this vulnerability in the first place? Did they deviate it from the business process or best, coding practices? How we can enhance and help them to be better? And I think it's a big collaborative sort of work to get there. I think secondly, I kind of probably can segue into posts. So I made a post about cybersecurity culture about 2 weeks ago, which had about 200,000 views and I don't know how many hundreds comments and thousands of likes. And I think it's very important. I think, it takes time to realize that unless you build and embed the right, correct, and supportive cybersecurity sort of culture, you are unlikely to move the needle in the right direction. But it comes in two ways, I think normally, if you think about the business, normally cybersecurity is sort of sits and accountability within cybersecurity department. And I always give people a very simple example. When you left your house this morning, did someone else lock the door for you or you locked it yourself? So unless you build an accountability across every single business unit that they are responsible for their cybersecurity and I'm there to advise them how they can achieve that, you are unlikely to achieve much success in cybersecurity. So embedding the correct culture from the top down and bottom up and aligning incentives, accountabilities within the business is going to make you so much better. And I always say that same culture stems into two things: awareness. So if you do an annual awareness exercise where you ask people to watch an hour of video, it's nonsense and you're never going to achieve anything. So instead of an hour, if you can split an hour in 52 weeks, which is about a couple of minutes a week, and drop a newsletter, a hint, something that's constantly at the forefront of people's mind that relates to their home activities, you're going to be so much better for it. And then another very important gem that when I chatted with CISO from BBC, she told me that if you're managing technology instead of relationships as a CISO, you are failing. And I think it's so important, I understand tech skills are very important, and I've kind of dabbled around various tech skills to get towards the leadership. But once you are in leadership, should no longer dabbling in managing technology. You should dabbling in managing relationships and understanding other business units' pain points and how you can help. How to learn how to say yes to the business, but these are our requirements in order for us to say yes. How to showcase your security initiatives ROI and become a great storyteller of why these initiatives we are building are important for the business. I think this is the way you can achieve success. And it takes time to understand, that you are not there, micromanaging your team. You are there to, help them and essentially open any doors where they're struggling. I always say in terms of like team management, praise them in public and teach them in private. So, you are there to allow your team to flourish, and you hire people in order to do the job. So trust them to do the job and listen to them. They are the biggest proponents and advisors in your success.
Sage advice. I absolutely love that. And it like kind of touching back to, more and more breaches are happening and more money needs to be spent. It's almost like we've forgotten the human side of cyber, and we've put so much focus on everything's a technology problem, but it isn't. You've touched upon two key things, which is getting to the root cause of why it's like again a vulnerability has been introduced. Is it because maybe the developer has deviated from a process, or they've never been educated on security? Something like the OWASP top 10's never been a thing as part of their educational learning. And also, like, a lot of the US CISOs that I speak with, I would say 90% of them, the common theme is risk management, understanding the business impact, understanding the realm that goes beyond security. So like it slows the organization down. Things like tech debt become an issue because ultimately everything is a risk seen at a business. I think once you establish that education and cultural path that you've spoken about, then things like introducing risk management is quite easy, or introducing, I don't know, like automated scanning in a pipeline or whatever it may be, any kind of technical control. So I would say then, Marius, in terms of how do you change a culture in an organization? So like from day one, everyone always asks me like, oh, how do you like implement DevSecOps, or how do you kind of change a business mindset? Is there any advice you would give around that?
I think obviously the one thing you have to understand, I've been part of building, whether it's AppSec or DevSecOps programs, and that cultural shift or change, it takes anywhere from 12 to 18 months. So it's not an overnight process. And I think the big thing is find people who understand where you're getting at. But I think the key point is, I always say, I know many CISOs who, post and complain that they haven't got a budget, they haven't got a support. And I always say, I'm a big proponent of saying that it's not the audience problem, it's the speaker's problem, because you can't get through the people, you can't translate so they will understand. So in a way, I think in a business, as you say, great advice from Keith Price, who's a CISO at National Highways, everyone's talking about first 30, 60, whatever, 90-day plan when you go in as a CISO about doing this or that. I think the most important part of the business is to meet people, offer them help and advice. It doesn't even have to be cybersecurity, just offer them help. Build a relationship with people. And then you need to understand the personas. Once you meet and spend time with these people, you understand, and you have to sometimes even ask how people like to consume information. This is the way that will help you to narrate the story that people understand. We keep talking about, risk management. Like, risk management, even, we think that boards understand. Not every board member understands risk management. That's in another, lesson where you need to translate. Just because you bring 5x5 matrix doesn't mean that people will understand what a 16 risk versus 12 risk means. And, again, I've been working with one business who are building a risk sort of quantification platform. And again, it's a great thing and a great, I think, path towards actually allowing you to showcase ROI, showcasing, for example, when you start talking money, saying, okay, we have this risk of potential X, say £1 million of if this risk materializes. Now, if I put a control that costs £50,000 and reduces risk by 50%, now that's an amazing ROI story. I'm spending 50 to save 500. That's an easy story to sell. But if you're just talking about, I'm going to spend 50 grand to go risk from 16 to 12, that might not mean much to some other people. So it's about understanding their personas and how to communicate effectively to people so they will take on a journey on their narrative story. That's I think, an important lesson to learn.
I think it's a really good point, because you need those details, because back to what you were saying earlier, you're telling a story, you need to relate it back to them personally and also that business impact. And I think it gets lost in so many different conversations, and then you kind of alienate your audience. Back to you saying, be a storyteller, tell them why it's important, tell them the impact and how it relates to them. So, it feels like the CISO role or a cyber leader role is more of a politician than anything. You're trying to obtain votes, to
Yeah.
push through, I don't know, legislation, for using that metaphor or whatever. But in terms of a topic that you want to discuss, you feel needs relevance or clearing up within the industry. We've had so many items here, everything from pen testing right through to supplier management. So is there anything at the top of mind, Marius, that you want to discuss?
I think, I'm on the last sort of trend where we've been talking. I think it's important to highlight, and I guess we need to keep talking, is that CISO role is changing. And I think, in order for us to stay relevant, we need to adapt. We've been talking a bit about business, but I guess, from legacy point of view, if we look at CISO, it was a sort of type of C-suite position, but it was tasked to securing essentially IT part of the business. Now, with digital sort of proliferation across the whole business, we got applications, we got data across everywhere. CISO becoming sort of, a really important part of the business where we securing not only IT, we got data and applications in HR, business development across everywhere, and it's becoming really important. And the thing is that the lesson that we always say, we need to be 100% of the right, where hackers only need to get in once. They don't break in, they log in. So some of these lessons I think is very important, and we are becoming a real sort of business enabler and sort of business executive. Is I think there are kind of ways where people talking where CISO role is going and merging. There are talks about being a CRO, but not chief risk officer, but chief resilience officer. We're talking about, actually there are calls even now, which are becoming really interesting. Like, I know from legacy point of view, CISOs used to report to the CIOs. That always created a conflict of interest, because CIO is tasked with availability, we are tasked with confidentiality and potentially integrity. There are calls now for CIOs to report into CISOs, actually, and flip that agenda of security importance. So it'll be interesting how it's going to shape. Some people saying CISO roles are dying and it's going to morph into something bigger, where actually CISO's taking hold of the actual whole IT departments and dealing with security. I've been myself, kind of wrangling, and I think we people been talking about the responsibility that falls on CISO's heads with lawsuits in US and the regulations that coming on board. And I think it's important to set yourself up correctly when you join a CISO role. I've been big on writing cybersecurity charter and making sure that you set out responsibilities of who's accountable, who's responsible in your cybersecurity program, and how you gain access and visibility. Because there's one thing, when you go into bigger organizations, there's a lot of political games, political moves where security are prevented to seeing access because there's a lot of spider webs and things like that. So the cybersecurity charter allows you to say that the responsibility of any project management is to involve security from the project initiation, making sure that IT can't block access for visibility in order for you to assess the security of any platform, infrastructure, and things like that. So, and it sets sounds, accountability that, C-suite or the board is accountable for cybersecurity, but they outsource responsibility for building the program to the CISO. So making sure that we understand how does this work. And I think building relationships. CISO role is gonna, I think, evolve and change, and there are CISO roles now that's part of the vendor programs, part of the internal programs. But I think the most important thing is collaboration across various communities, events. I see a lot of good things happening in how some vendors actually are moving away from sort of forcing sales agenda and actually proactively creating a peer sort of sharing knowledge sessions where you actually get to learn, because sometimes it's really fascinating. I remember one really interesting event. We were part San CISO network, so they do some great in-person events, and you get to really see like the different caliber of CISO, because I'm a CISO and I've got a team of 6-7 people. We're a relatively small business, under 200 people just now, but then you're sitting some next to CISO, I think it was from HSBC, and he was saying we got 100 data scientists tasked to build a Monte Carlo simulations for their risk management. So it's a different perspective, a different scale, where you got 100 people just doing one task in your risk management process. So it's really interesting to learn lessons how are people solving tasks in their business. And I think it's that understanding, and moving away from technology. I get sometimes to talk. So many CISOs ask, oh, what's the best tool for this or for that.
Let's talk about something that might be keeping you awake at night. Cybersecurity. According to Vanta's latest State of Trust report, it's the number one concern for UK businesses. That's where Vanta comes in. Whether you're a startup, growing fast, or already established, Vanta can help you get ISO 27001 certified and more without the headaches. Vanta allows your company to centralize security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risks to help your team not only get compliant, but stay compliant. Stop stressing over cybersecurity and start focusing on growing your business in 2025. Check out Vanta and let us handle the tough stuff. Head to vanta.com/decloak to learn more. Because when it comes to your business, it's not just about keeping the lights on, it's about keeping everything secure. Thanks.
The tool, however good it is, it doesn't mean that from business A it's going to translate into business E. It's about use cases, and so many times I find that people or CISOs sometimes fall into the trap of loving the tool and then trying to find a use case to use the tool instead of vice versa, actually having a problem and then looking for a tool. So I think we need to move away from playing too many technology games and actually becoming a real business asset. And I think that's where we kind of working towards of solving real business problems and building those stories that actually we're not there just a cost center. We actually add value. We can allow business to do more sales while doing good security. We're allowing to prevent fines while doing good regulatory work and things like that. So I think these are the important lessons of where the CISO role is going.
Absolutely, and it makes sense. And one thing you touched upon there was a CISO charter. Some organizations might have a security charter, but like the first time you introduced that in an organization, was it a one-page document? Was it like, was it like I don't know, 10 pages, 20 pages? What was the kind of format of it looking? Was it, because it was the first foray of this type of charter, was it like, I don't know, a Notion page, Confluence? What did it look like? And also, how did you get buy-in for that? Like, because there's been many people probably thinking that just now, being like, that's easier said than done, but it's like, well, kind of talk us through that, because I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah. I think it can be anything. We normally do it. It's a DocuSign document. It can be Word, Excel. We can sit wherever as long as you gather the signatures from the relevant executives. That's the most important point. But I think I kind of stumbled upon the fact of that in one of the Greg Van der Gaas books, and I've kind of extracted quite a few good knowledge points from his books. But I think the important lesson here was, again, not to just do blind copy and paste, but actually understand where is he going from and how we can adapt and use those things. Because I similarly as well did a quite interesting thing. But let's first discuss, I guess, the charter. I guess the charter wasn't a hard sell in a business, because I think it's probably first time I'm in a business where actually people say the security is the first, but normally it's just words. Actually, people living and actually whether it's OPCO, whether it's any presentation, normally security is one of the first to present. I get a direct line with leadership to actually talk about security issues, and then we're actually being supported and an understanding of what we try and achieve, preventing bad things from happening. But I think I just wanted to set out an agenda of what is expected of the business in order to achieve good security. So leadership understood where we was going, and it was, apart from the, accountability, they obviously understand where accountability lies, but the rest of the agenda on a charter it was kind of, it's really straightforward, is making sure that obviously we have access to where we need to access to be able to assess security, making sure that all the projects are set correctly, because, I'm sure everyone in cybersecurity business has been in sort of in the place where, all of a sudden, lastminute.com project is being published and they say, oh, we forgot security sign off. Can you sign it off because it's going live tomorrow? And he's like, I can't do that. You needed to get involved me from the day one. And I think it's about selling to the business. Like, my main selling point to the business which really was easy to do, is like, look, guys, I never want to be a blocker. I never want to be a stopper project at the end to say, oh no, I haven't reviewed it. But I said my goal is I can make your project be better because I'm starting from day one, and I can advise you and help, not only because of my security expertise, but my technology expertise as well, to hopefully build a more secure product, build a more secure project, and making sure that we select correct vendors as well. So that's another thing sometimes that's overlooked. We are potentially, whenever we build a solution, we might include some third parties. And I never want to be the person where, at step 21, I'm assessing that vendor and we find out that their security controls are not enough. They're not compliant, and we have to search for a new vendor. Now, if you involved me in step 1, I would have helped you to align the vendor search that aligns with our needs. And sometimes, a couple of these sort of stray missteps will make the business, understand the value of what we're trying to provide. It's always about providing guidance, value, and help and support for business to achieve its goals. And I think that's the important part. Now, if I steer into the second part of it, based on a charter, I rebuilt my cybersecurity program. That was, again, similar to what I extracted from Greg as well, which I thought was quite a great idea. Build a program based out of 10 domains, but basically assigning accountability and ownership of domains within my team. So I've got 2 guys in SecOps, they own SecOps domain. Now, the way this transformed the performance of the team, because they had accountability, they had ownership of their own part of cybersecurity program that they ran with it. It's a tremendous thing, I guess, when you give power to your team, and instead of, checking every 5 minutes what you're doing, I'm always been a big proponent of, I always say to my team, look, guys, I don't care if you want to go to the doctors at 10 a.m., you need to pick up your kids at 3 p.m. Do what you have to do. Just let me know, saying I'm unavailable for next 2 hours. Absolutely fine. But when there is an incident at 10 p.m., I expect you to help me, and we're going to jump on a call and solve that incident. So this sort of, mutual understanding of how we work really helps the team. And then they have a responsibility of maturing their part of the cybersecurity program towards delivering to the business goals. And that just transforms how team works, their enthusiasm and their, desire to do more.
I love that, the empowerment element. I don't think there's enough leaders. I worked at an organisation where we had a leader who basically micromanaged over 100 people. And it's like, well, how can you scale? How can you deal with tech debt? How can you deal with an incident? When everyone's kind of on a knife edge. But so it's kind of circling back to, like, I think one thing you spoke about was the future of a CISO role. I don't know if you know Ira Winkler. Ira posts quite a lot in terms of people always moan about it. Like, what do you do after you're finished being a CISO? And people say, oh, where you get into the sales side of it, or you become a CIO, or whatever it may be. What's your point of view, Marius, in terms of where you see the role of a CISO going in the next kind of 2 or 3 years? Maybe a key driver of that could be AI.
Yeah, I think, there are a number of ways where can it go. I guess it depends on the person as well. The role itself, as I said, kind of touched a bit earlier, it can grow, I guess, into, and I see a lot of people, obviously, we're managing a lot of risk. So it can grow and mature into something like chief risk officer, or actually taking the whole enterprise risk and being responsible for it. And one of my dear friends just actually went from being a CISO to a vendor risk sort of management, big business. So that's one aspect. I think the other aspect, with the proliferation of DORA and where it's going, again, as I mentioned, it can grow into something like chief resilience officer. And actually, because I think the one important aspect of CISO, and if I think, I don't remember where we discussed this, I think if we look at cybersecurity, sort of 2010s were all about, cyber sort of prevention of breaches. So we were talking about perimeter and making sure that nothing bad happens. 2020s, I think, is the goal of, we understand that we can't prevent everything. So now is the goal of, how do we maintain business operations while bad things are happening? And I think that sort of that word of resilience, I'm always bigger proponent, and I think it's we still have obviously a long way to go. But one of the really great books that I've read was, I don't remember the lady's name. She works for Fastly, and she wrote a book about chaos engineering.
Yeah.
And I'm a great fan about that. And I think that's an amazing way to achieve resilience, where you actually start injecting faults into production to understand that, yes, bad things are going to happen, but how do you react? How do you maintain business operations? How you can still serve clients while bad things are happening in your environment? And I think that's an important lesson to the businesses, to understand that, you can't no longer, hold up with matchsticks, some business operation or some business, application that, they say, oh, you don't fix it until it's broken. But it's about iterating, because it's inevitable that at some point something bad's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned chaos engineering, because I saw a thing recently when I was one of the first senior engineers at Meta or Facebook back in the day, and they were constantly challenged to break things in order to, maybe scale quicker or fail fast and everything else. And he coined the term chief chaos engineer or something like that. Yeah. And he's obviously made his money in tech, but he still works with a couple of entities, and that was his main role, was to basically try and find as many flaws as possible to then allow the business to grow and scale. And I thought that was quite interesting. He spoke about it, where it's now become more infrastructure hybrid security, where they obviously collaborate on this. And it's like, he was saying it's like a whole new kind of level of DevSecOps, because it was fun. They both enjoyed it in terms of the different groups he tested it on. So I don't know, that could be something, I guess, that becomes dependent on if you're a technical CISO. It could be something that eventually emerges. But sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's a very important aspect, because even some of the things, like, I always say to, like, there's a couple of things, or a couple of strands, I guess, to pull it out of it. First of all, testing bad things allows you to, fail quicker and close the feedback loop as quickly as possible, because that's the one thing I think people sometimes miscomprehend. The quicker you fail, the quicker you learn, and you can implement things to make it better. So closing that feedback loop soon gives you a great benefit. But I think something else that sometimes it doesn't often happen is, again, similar thing you should, I think, introduce in security as well, is to understand, how can we inject bad things into the SOC, into, your operations, and actually understand how your team, how the tools behave when bad things are happening. Because it's about testing, so many times I always say to people, like, there's a couple of things I think sometimes people do not understand. Test, risk assessment, SOC, it's a point in time sort of thing. And as soon as you set it up, it starts counting where the drift is no longer, where the, its service is not applicable anymore. And, so many times I've worked actually with one Australian company that they are coining a phrase called pen testing 2.0. So instead of doing, once assessment, they give you, say, 40 hours a month, and you continually assess and evolve. And actually they feed in as a red team into your blue operations to continuously improve. Because what happens, I've seen so many times, people outsource and buy third-party SOC. They configure it, but then the problem is, unless you are working together in unison to mature that SOC, it becomes out of date very quickly. And then, I've been in there. Pen testing company came in, completely took down their finance application, extracted all of the credentials, and SOC didn't see a thing. It didn't even blink. There's no red lights, nothing. And I was like, guys, you need to remember, and actually there's a post coming out tomorrow. I'm not going to give too much. It's about actually SOC, but it's about talking, what you need to measure. So many times, SOC providers selling you things like time to respond. The first question you need to ask, does time to respond include automation? If it does, it's a bull crap matrix, because nobody cares. If your time to respond is 5 minutes, but it's included in automation, yeah, of course you're going to respond with 5 minutes, because it's automation is going to pick up or acknowledge that ticket. The question is, and I always say you have to weigh between the two, time to respond versus quality. If you push your SOC analytics to respond within 5 minutes, what do you think is going to deteriorate? Quality of response.
100%.
And I'm much more proponent of actually spend extra 5 minutes, but make sure you do quality investigation and monitor. Make sure your SOC has 100% coverage of your estate. Make sure you continuously improve the use cases, because your environment is going to change. You're going to bring in new applications, new use cases. The SOC has continually matured. I don't remember where, in one of the SANS Against CISO conferences, the guy actually spoke, and it made really sense. Like, he doesn't want SOC reporting into security. He actually wants SOC to contact development, to contact, infrastructure. So it's a third-party SOC, but he actually made sure that they have contact to actually relevant teams who can actually answer questions, because your SOC analyst can become a bottleneck. Because if you first send a request to SOC analyst then has to go and talk to team B, team C until they can provide an answer. Now that becomes, again, become a long-winded loop that you need to close in order to provide information.
That makes sense, because the whole triage process can take ages. And again, if people are fumbling in the dark trying to get information where they can just go straight to infrastructure team or developers or DevOps guys who are closest to it. So it makes absolute sense. And that pen testing 2.0, I'm going to dig more into that, because it completely makes sense, because your environment's constantly changing. You're deploying new services, things break and things expand. And you also have a shadow IT element where people are just doing whatever they want somewhere. That's pretty cool. And it'd be interesting to see if that's just like a bunch of testers, or it's just like a platform design. Yeah, I'll check it. And if anyone has any comments on pen testing 2.0, certainly leave them in the channel. Moving into the last segment then, the episode, Marius, is the one thing you think is BS in the industry and needs to change or needs a focus. Yeah.
I think obviously there's a lot of BS flying about. There's a few things obviously that really get on my nerves. Is first of all, but I think again it's about education and understanding. So I want to just, again, I'll probably pull a few plugs and highlight some people. But if you haven't read Ross Haliluk's book Cyber for Builders, it's a definite must read, because most of us in cybersecurity leadership or even cybersecurity don't really understand the other side of the business of how vendors are building products. And it's really, really opened my eyes. For example, if you take VC funding, these people want their money back. So they will actually force you to hire salespeople and actually sell the products. And that's why it leads to things like, I'm not going to mention many slogans, but, you got cyber vendors running slogans like end cyber risk, like we could ever end the cyber risk. But that's driven by VCs and marketing people who do not understand cybersecurity. And that creates a sort of a distortion field in cyber where, it's really baffling. We got another vendors, again, won't mention names, but people probably know, is that, take CEOs on lavish holidays to make sure they get a signature. And then incoming CISO finds all of a sudden on a budget, a line, product's been already bought without his, input for a great amount of money, where vendors running, 80% of the sales force, no R&D. So even if they buy a great product, that product becomes crap over a year or two because they're not doing any R&D. So that's one part of the business. And I think, there are, and I've been, as I say, I like giving feedback. I like talking to various people. And actually, I've seen a lot of vendors that are actually doing really great things and really collaborating, CISO peer sort of knowledge sharing and actually doing some great things. So I think we are sort of slowly changing, because I think vendors can't any longer achieve sales through, cold calling, cold emailing. That doesn't work anymore. So that's definitely was a bullcrap, and I think it's changing. The other thing I think, which is, kind of we talked a bit about, is that, technology is the most important part. You can't any longer live on or die on technology hill and thinking that you're going to be technology expert, you're going to become a great CISO. So yes, you need technical ability and you need technical knowledge so you can have a conversation with your team. But actual business skills, understanding, EBITDA, understanding how your business makes money, understanding to build relationships, all of these other skills, I'm talking about, we talked about, empathy. I've read the great book, Smartest Person in the Room. Again, some amazing stuff and some amazing skills in there. There's an amazing book called Influence by FBI Negotiator, again, teaching you some amazing skills, actually how to get your program and get C-suite to understand and influence their decision making. Some of these skills are going to be invaluable. Actually do a lot of public speaking and become comfortable, being in front of people and presenting your narrative. As you kind of alluded earlier as well, it's inevitable that sometimes, there's technical problems happen, you lose a mic, you lose something, but actually getting yourself out there and I always say to people, become comfortable being uncomfortable, because if it happens often, it no longer phases you. And I think that's, again, that's something that you need to nurture. Even I always say, even to junior, I've been mentoring a lot of people through Caps Lock back in the day, and I said to people, look, even if you are early in your career, I said, no matter how great of an engineer, analyst you are, unless you can convince other people that your idea is the best idea, your idea might never reach a day of light. So, those communication skills are going to be important throughout your career, not only in leadership.
Absolutely agree. And it's sage advice. And God, I think we've covered so many topics today, Marius, and we've obviously given a few people a shout out. Keith and Greg have been on the podcast, and they've actually been the most popular, and I'm not surprised because they're two absolute icons and people we have a huge respect for. And I'll need to get Greg's books on my Christmas Amazon list. And again, Marius, you've mentioned a few books. I'll get a list off you after this episode as well. But any conclusion, any thoughts before we wrap up the episode?
I think the last advice, which I think really kind of resonated as well with some people, and we have a chance to make this industry better by helping vendors, peers, and sharing knowledge. So I always say to people, for example, people always ask me how to get into sort of cyber advisory positions, board of advisors positions. The one thing I always say to people is, provide help, share your knowledge without expectation of anything in return. Because only those people who don't expect anything, good things come to. So if you come with a vendor saying, I'll provide advice, but I want to be on your cyber advisory, what do you think is going to happen? But, actually build it. So it's again becomes a skill and sort of you build an intuition when you help a lot of startups of where do they need to go. Because again, there's one thing that you need to understand. Again, so many times products die because people go in a feature sprawl. They're trying to address every single feature from every single feedback. And I said, guys, you need to understand, you need to get a product out to get the actual customer feedback as soon as possible. Again, closing the feedback loop. But I said, when you get a feedback from 20 people, you need to pick common denominators of, say, 3, the most important features, and build on them. Start somewhere. You need to understand your target audience. Cybersecurity sort of vendor landscape is littered with competition. You have to enter the competition and know where you stand. For example, if you're just starting out, you're never going to compete with Wiz. But I see so many great products, for example, where they say, we might build maybe 70% of Wiz capabilities, but we're going to charge 20% of the cost, and we're going to enter into SMB type of market where smaller businesses can't afford Wiz. Now, that's a great business use case. Now, we discussed a bit about risk quantification. There are various challenges that businesses and cybersecurity leaders face. that you can address them. You don't obviously not always you need to build someone like Wiz or Snick to be successful. There are great smaller companies to be successful. Even, for example, I've been talking to some consultancy businesses. If you look, again, there is a bit of a problem in cybersecurity. Like all of the cybersecurity salespeople, they get their salary based on commission. Now, if I've got a call with someone whose potential contract worth 500,000 versus 50,000, which call do you think I'm going to take? Obviously, the bigger one. So it comes to a point sometimes that smaller SMB type of businesses, even if they approach some consultancy, they're not going to get advice because they're too small, and it becomes a problem where it becomes prohibitive because they can't get cybersecurity advice. So I've seen a great deal of small sort of niche consultancies popping up to actually address this problem, because there's a big problem. There might even be, there's so many businesses that don't even have dedicated security people. They have one IT guy that's trying to, get to them to the sort of, and I always say security is the place where, you want to be secure enough so they knock on your neighbor's door, not on your door. Yeah. And that's sometimes all you need to do but to get even there, it's a journey. And that's where you need to be at. So hopefully that's helpful to people.
I love it. And again, Marius, thank you so much for your time. And everyone, please like, share, subscribe, show Marius some love in terms of his podcast. We'll plug that in the episode as well in the description. And thanks again for your time, Marius. I appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me, Leo.